Unless you want to speak. Huh?
Okay, so I'm going to go back a little bit to where we were yesterday. But today is a yard site of a very chashuv Yid who saved the lives of thousands of Yidden by giving up his life literally. Eli Cohen. You know who Eli Cohen is? Eli Cohen is the most successful, most famous spy. He infiltrated Syrian society to such a level that he was almost going to become the Minister of Defense of Syria, an Israeli agent. And he was able to he had a photographic memory. So what he would always do is he would give the Yidden a heads up, an advanced warning when there was going to be a terrorist attack. But in those days, Syria controlled the Golan Heights. So they had artillery where they would shoot from the highlands onto the Yidden. And he once got the Syrian army to give him a tour of all of their artillery positions in the Golan Heights. And he, with a photographic memory, was able to go back home and pinpoint the exact latitude and longitude on a map to map out for Israelis exactly where each of these artillery pieces are. But to make it even more precise, he went and said, "How you talking? What a chutzpah! The poor Syrian soldiers who are manning these artillery, they should sweat in the beating sun. I want you to plant a eucalyptus tree over every single piece of artillery to protect our soldiers." And they told Israel, wherever you see a eucalyptus tree, you'll know there's artillery, because he made sure to have them plant non-native species. And in the 6-day war, like in the first 5 minutes, they took out all the artillery because they knew exactly where they were. I'm sorry? Yeah. And he saved many thousands of Eden from slaughter and from terrorism. He gave himself up. Because what happened was, in those days, everything was a telegraph Morse code. And he was undetectable because they didn't yet have technology to detect a telegraph. But when the last time he went back to Israel, they told him that there's Russian equipment in Syria now that can detect transmissions from a telegraph. You can't go back. He said, "I don't care if I'm giving up my life. But if I could save Eden, I'm happy to give up my life." So he went back and he transmitted a telegraph warning that there was going to be a terrorist attack. They burst into his apartment, they caught him in the act, and they were so angry. You have to understand, the heads of the Syrian government were so close to him, they're such close friends. And he mama stabbed him in the back. They couldn't take it. They tortured him and they hung him, and they never gave his body back after he was dead. Because he mama got him. Eli Cohen. Yeah. He has a surviving brother. His Alman is still alive. You can say is Zatzal. He's a Yid who literally gave up his life to save other Yid. It's called Our Man in Damascus. Yeah, it's a phenomenal movie. It's cathartic. But you see, only a Yid will knowingly give up his life if he knows that he's saving masses of Yid. Okay, let's see the Gemara weiter. So I'm going to go back a little bit because I rushed then. Now that we've established that we have a Gzer Shava from Pesach to Truma, and that's how we learn that by Truma and Oral may not eat, why don't we take it to the next level and learn more from Pesach to Truma? Ima Pesach, Milas Chorav, Vavodav Makeves. Not only do you have to have a bris in order to be able to eat from the Korban Pesach, but any males in your household must have a bris as well. Maybe Truma should have the same rule. Av Truma Milas Chorav Vavodav Makeves. The Gemara Amar Kra, there's a meal. It says Umal Ta'isa Aziyachal Boy. By Korban Pesach, there's the hakpada that all of his chorim have to be malad. Milas chorim avodav ma'akeves boy hilechal b'Pesach. And milas chorim avodav ma'akeves b'truma. But by truma, there's no such hakpada. Frank the Gemara, if you're going to say that, then say the whole the whole chiyuv to be a mal, the whole problem of being an oral, you should also say dafka boy. Yochi ema kol oral loyachal boy. Boy dafka by the carbon pesach any oichel. Aval oichel b'truma, but maybe an oral may eat truma. So tomorrow we can't say that because we have a gzera shava to tell us not. Hakshiv toishav v'sacher. You have a gzera shava to tell you something that applies by pesach, applies by truma, and you have a meat of boy to tell you something that applies by pesach. Does not apply by truma. Why apply to the oral and not apply to the zacher in his household? Flip that around. So mistaver arelis de gufei, the arelis of his own body, havale l'rebuye. Why? Shekein ma'isa begufay. It involves an actual surgery on his own body. But on his curse, if he doesn't mal himself, he's chayiv curse. Adab affected more. Milas chor v'avodov havale l'rebuye, because it has a mila shekein yeshna b'chol shah. You could only mal yourself once. You could be an oral once, and you could mal yourself once. But children and avodim, as many as you buy, there'll always be a chiyuv to make a bris. There's two similarities to Ariel Skufay. It's a svara to say. You want to say that he himself can eat truma if he's an oral. But if the others harm in his household are real that he can't eat, that's not logical. Period. So now this is where we finished off yesterday. So now we have these boys called oral yochal boy. We have these umalt yochal boy. Boy tells you that this only applies to carbon pesach, not anything else. Hashadamrit boy l'drasha udasa. Now that you've told us that when it says boy in that pasuk, it's a drasha to teach us that dafka over here and whatever halacha we're discussing wouldn't apply somewhere else. Well, then let's look at other halachas. It says by the carbon pesach that a ben nechar may not eat it. Lamali boy. What is the boy for? Zok to Gemara. Hamoras das poiseles boy. The ein hamoras das poiseles b'maiser. The carbon nechar doesn't just refer to a guy. It refers to anybody was likened up who denies Yiddishkeit. Not because someone who's a mummer not to do mitzvahs. So he may not eat from the carbon pesach, but Hamaras Das may eat meiser. And Tosfos even says he might even be able to eat truma. Kol aral lo yochel boy lamali. What is the boy being mamayed by kol aral lo yochel boy? Zaktimar boy eina yochel aval oichelu b'matzu more. Even though an oral may not eat the carbon pesach, he has to eat matzah more. Now this is a shayla because matzah memela, there's an independent chiyuv to eat matzah. However, murr, the whole mitzvah to eat murr is a way to eat the carbon pesach. Al matzah is umurayim. There's no special mitzvah to eat murr. The mitzvah is when you eat the carbon pesach, eat it with matzah and murr. So some of the Rishonim ask, so how could you say that aval oichelu b'matzah murr? Memela, he has to eat matzah because matzah is an independent mitzvah. But what's up with murr? So there are those who actually say murr is just agav orcha, but really it's just matzah that we're focused on. We need a pasuk to tell us that an oral may not eat from the carbon pesach. And we need to know that a mummer may not eat from the carbon pesach. Because of Echmana oral, if the Torah would have only said that an oral may not eat from the carbon pesach, an oral is mois. I could tell you that firsthand. I used to go to a goyish gym, and I was in the locker room. An oral is mois. There's no other way to explain it, right? But someone who has bad days, he's not mois, he has bad days. The loy mois. Maybe his days are mias, but the mensch alone is just mias, right? Aimaloy. Maybe he would be allowed to eat from the carbon pesach. Because of Echwana Kalba Nechar.
What do you mean ben nechar his days? Ben nechar is mias. Why do we say that?
The nechar doesn't mean a goy. The nechar means a Yisrael moment. Why? You ever went to a locker room? One's ugly, one's not.
We're talking about carbon pesach. We're not talking about why would a physical.
I guess the shaila is when we say someone can't still to the kedusha of the carbon pesach, if it's someone who has, it's not just a regular, it's not zits, it's not like a pimple. It's a mias kind of good. So it's a mias kind of a good. I guess because that hits you harder. That's for someone who lives in the Gashmistic Welt, that's more apparent.
No, you can say the contrary. The oral is bitsanua. It's covered up. The dais, he opens up his mouth and you hear all kinds of narishkan.
I hear every time he opens up his mouth, you hear him. So his heart isn't in the right place. He's not subservient to the Ravonish Shalom. Oral, maybe you would think he would be allowed to eat. That's why the Torah has to tell us, someone who has deus koizvos may not eat from the Korban Pesach, and somebody who is an oral is not allowed to eat from the Korban Pesach. Mimenu lomali. It says, al teichlu mimenu no. You're not allowed to eat from the Korban Pesach raw. Al teichlu mimenu no. Uvoshel b'ushel b'mayim. Lomali, why does it use the word mimenu? And that's the word, the mimenu. It says mimenu several times when the pasuk discusses the Korban Pesach. And in Mitzvah, when we get to Daf Ayin Daled, we're going to learn all of the drushes from those words. And Rabbi Yitzchak Amar is going to share with us a lot of information in a couple of days. Now we're going back to our original brisa, where we were looking for a makar that an oral may not eat truma. And we brought two shittas. The first shitta was Rabbi Lozer, who we thoroughly explained up until this point, who learns it from Gzeres Shava from Korban Pesach. But Rabbi Kiva told us then, Einay Tzarech, we don't need Gzeres Shava from Korban Pesach to know that a oral may not eat truma. Because our Reyu Omer, by the Parsha of Kahuna, it says ish, with a whole bunch of different problems, may not eat truma. And we darshan ish l'Rabbi says oral. Not only are all the other items in the list not allowed to eat truma, but an oral as well may not eat truma. So we don't have Gzeres Shava at all. For the Gemara, the same question we asked on the Gzeres Shava. Ve'imel Rabbi says ha'oinen. How do you know from ish we're learning to disqualify an oral from eating truma? Maybe it's to disqualify an oinen from eating truma. Right? It's exactly the same kasha we asked on the Gzeres Shava. Amar Rabbi Yosy bar Chanina, Amar Kra, v'chol zar. The same pause. It says v'chol zar to teach us zaris amartila. I said a zar may not eat truma, but I never disqualified an oinen from eating truma. In fact, the Gemara, ema v'loy arlois. Maybe don't say zaris v'loy aninas. Say zaris v'loy arlois. Zok the Gemara, but haksiv ishish. It says ishish to say that an oral cat. In fact, my rice. Maybe ishish you should apply to aninas, and the chalzar you should apply to an oral. Zok the Gemara, mistama arlos have a leather abuli. It's more mistaber to say that an oral is included in the group of people that may not eat truma. Shekain maisim, krusim, v'davar ha'am. And the Gemara elaborates. Mechusim ma'isa, not having a bris is missing a physical ma'isa, and the ma'isa begufa. It's also a ma'isa that's changing the go for the person. So that's why the simon was ma'sim, because there's two things that are to do with ma'isa that makes it more mistaber to exclude an oral from eating truma. And vanish kares, someone who doesn't give himself a bris is chayiv kares. And v'yesh nailaf ne'adipa. The mitzvah of Mila came before Kabbalah Sefirah. Umila schara b'avad of makeves. And Mila is also very severe because by a Korban Pesach at least, even maling his schara b'avad is ma'akev. So therefore, Mila is serious. That's why we choose to include it in the group of people that cannot eat truma. Like more adrabah, aninas have a leather abri. Aninas also have a very severe side. Shekan yeshna b'chol shah. Aninas could occur at any time. Being in Ga'ara, once you have a bris, that's not going to happen again. It's not going to reoccur. But the Eges Banashim and Nashim, a woman could be an onion. A woman cannot be an arla. She can't be an oral. She could be an urala, but she can't be an oral. Right? The ein biyadai lisakein atzmai. And an onion can't fix himself. It's got to time out. There are still more reasons why an oral should be prohibited from eating truth. Rav Amar, just like he said earlier, even if it wasn't for the fact that an oral had more severe things involved, connected to it, even without that, we would say that it's the oral who cannot eat truth. Why? Because it says, Amar Kra ish ish. What type of psul applies to a man, not to a woman? So from ish ish alone, it's not just a generic inclusion, it's an inclusion focused on a problem that could only occur with the man, which is a race. Frank the Gemara, Rabbi Kiva didn't use the Gzera Shava of Taishu V'Schir because he learned that an oral may not eat truma from the pasuk of Yosy. So he has a whole extra Gzera Shava to do. Rabbi Kiva, Hai Taishu V'Sacher, my Abed Lei. What does he learn from the extra word Taishu V'Sacher? Rabbi Shmaya, Lasuye, Aravi Mo, the Gavani Mo. The extra Taishu V'Sacher is actually mentioned in the parsha of Korban Pesach, we said. And it tells us that if you had a goy, a non-Jew, who had a bris, you would think he can eat from the Korban Pesach. Kamash Malon, that a non-Jew who had a bris cannot eat from the Korban Pesach. Frank the Gemara, Vahani Mulin, are you telling me that a goy with a bris is not called an oral? You're telling me a goy with a bris is called mo? I don't think so. But none we learned. Koinim, and we're going to learn this in the Durham. Koinim Shani Nehanu La Reilim. If I make a shavua that I will not be mahana any arelim, no arelim will be able to benefit from me. The lach is mutar b'arli Yisrael. You are allowed to be mahana a yid who's an oral, because a yid who didn't do a bris, a yid who still has his foreskin is not called an oral. He's called a yid with a foreskin, but he's not called an oral. But also, but if you had a guy who had a bris, he's still called a noodle, right? Or what if he said koinim shani nehana lemulin? What if he said the opposite? I'm not going to be mahana. I'm not going to have a no from someone with a bris. So the halach is mutar b'mulin eved kechavim because he's not called a mulin. But aser b'arli Yisrael. So you see very clearly here that a guy is an noodle, yom et habris, nish et habris, the noodle memunavshach, and a yid if he has his foreskin nishka noodle. So how would you have a havamina to suggest that a Ravi Mo or a Gavani Mo would be able to eat from the Korban Pesach at the Chanurel? Ella, because a Yisrael is not called a noodle, even if he happens to have a foreskin. A noodle is the colloquial application to the word noodle is a goy. Colloquial. In English. I didn't see the article.
I actually talk to what that word means.
Oh, gewaltig. So let's see Tosfos, because we're asking a question from the Durham about what the technical meaning of an oral is. When the Torah is talking about someone who can't eat the Korban Pesach, something technical. And the Durham isn't totally technical. So let's see what Rashi says about this. Which is the first wide line in Tosfos. Frank Tosfos, before Tosfos asks the kasha, he says, this is Mishkan kasha. The kasha that I'm about to ask you, Mishkan kasha. Ein lahakshos. Hey, Baruch from the Durham. How could you ask from the Durham, Lelishna the Krah, to define what the meaning of a word in the pasuk is? Did it be the Durham, halach acher loshem b'nei adam? By the Durham, whether it means completely something different from its technical meaning, if people use a certain term to describe a certain item, that's what you use when you're discussing what he meant by his neder, because we're trying to figure out what he meant. The the reason why here we could bring a raya from the Durham is because later on the Mishnah learns from the pasuk. It says Kichal Goyim Arelim V'chol Beis Yisrael Arelei. So you see very clearly that all Goyim, even Goyim who don't have foreskin, are Arelim. So we're bringing a raya from the Durham, but this Mishnah that discusses Arelim actually brings a raya from the pasuk. So in fact, the technical meaning as well is consistent in this case with how people use it in speech. That a guy is an udal no matter what, even if he doesn't have foreskin, and he's this kind of udal, even if he has foreskin. Okay, so let's see the Gemara weiter. This is going to get a little bit complicated. So Zok the Gemara. So we need to know, why does it say Gervet Amitoyshe V'Sacher by Korban Pesach? Ela lasuye ger shamo v'loy toval v'katan shenoylot keshuvah. It's coming to tell us that you know who else is not allowed to eat from the Korban Pesach? A ger that did mila but didn't do tefillah yet, or a cotton that was born moho and you did not yet do a tofas tambris. Because over he holds tzarach lahatet mimenu dambris. You have to make a tofas tambris. How will Rabbi Eliezer know that these two people cannot eat? How do we know these two people cannot eat? Rabbi Eliezer Tamei, Domer Ger Shemol V'Letavel Ger Ma'alyu Fakert. Rabbi Eliezer will learn that he will argue on Rabbi Kiva, and he will say that such a ger may eat from the carbon base, because sovereignty holds Katan Kishanoilad Mo Ain't Tzarech Lahatet Mimeni Dampers. Now there's an interesting shaila in the Rishonim. What happens if a goy did not make hatafas dambris, right? So we happen to have a machlokes right over here, whether or not, no, we don't have a machlokes. Everybody agrees that if a goy had a bris before he became a goy, he does need hatafas dambris. The shaila over here that we have between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Kiva is if a Jewish child needs hatafas dambris, right? So the Rishonim learn as follows. There are those Rishonim who learn that a ger for sure needs hatafas dambris, but not necessarily a Jewish child. Why would a Jewish child not need hatafas dambris? The teretz is because the whole purpose of the Mila, the child ba'etzim is not an oral, right? A Jew is not an oral, what we're saying. The whole purpose is, the problem is the foreskin must be removed. So therefore, you don't need a toughest dambris because there's no foreskin. Mashenkin a goy is an oral. So a goy needs a tikkun. So he needs the tikkun of a toughest dambris to give him that kedusha sager. That you need something. The Meiri says that the reason why a cotton would need a toughest dambris, according to the shita that you do need a toughest dambris, according to Rabbi Kiva, he says a chiddush. He says it has nothing to do with kedusha. What it's about is we're afraid that maybe not all of his foreskin was removed. So if you take him to a moil and you make the toughest dambris, he can get a really good look to make sure that all of the foreskin has been removed. That's how the Meiri looks. So it's not even a chiv to do a toughest dambris, although the Bahag holds that there's a chiv of a toughest dambris. So there's a whole shaila as to how it works. Zok to Gemara. Rabbi Eliezer hay ishish ma'avud. Rabbi Eliezer, what was his makor that by truma, an oral may not eat, is because it says toishav v'sachar to shava. So he doesn't have any limit for ishish. So what is he going to do with ishish? Zok to Gemara, he doesn't need any limit for it. Dibra Torah koloshim b'nei adam. The Torah speaks koloshim b'nei adam, and since the Torah speaks koloshim b'nei adam, you don't need a drasha from that. Cotton oral. And we had this shaila right at the beginning when we were discussing the machlokes Rashi and Tosfos. If an oral who's partner from Mila, if that oral is considered an oral. So the shaila here is oral mala soiche b'shem shel truma. We have a child who's not yet 8 days old, so he has his oral still. So is he allowed to have hana from truma, sicha kishtia? Is he allowed to be smeared with shemen shel truma, or is an oral not allowed to eat truma? So oral is shaloi bizman ma'akva. Someone who's an oral, but it's not yet the sman of bris. So maybe that's not called an oral. Is it ma'akav? Oiloi ma'akva, or it's not ma'akav. So this is a very interesting shaila, because the shaila here is the chiyuv there already? We just can't be mekayim it yet, or maybe the chiyuv isn't there until the 8th day. So this has some interesting nafkavinas. If there's no mitzvahs lulav, there's no mitzvahs esrog, there's no mitzvahs dalad minim yet, will you say that it becomes a chefsa shel mitzvah? If you hold not, well then if you decide that you want to eat your esrog the first night sukkos, there's no problem. It's not hokla mitzvah because the mitzvah wasn't there yet. Or you could know the mitzvah is already chal at the beginning of Yom Tov. You just can't be makayim it to live. That's how the Rishonim want to learn this shaila. So where was it really negela ma'aser? The Rambam says when he counts the mitzvahs, he counts Kriyish Mashal Shachris and Kriyish Mashal Arvis as one mitzvah. But why is it one mitzvah? It's two mitzvahs. There's a mitzvah to lay Krishna in the morning, and there's a mitzvah to lay it in the evening. So Vaisach is the Rambam holds that it's one mitzvah, but the time to do the second mitzvah, although the mitzvah is already chal in the morning, the time to do the second mitzvah didn't come till the night, unless you have the night come first. So the time to do the second mitzvah, the day didn't come till later. So you see that concept of the chiyuv could be there even though the ability to do it didn't come yet. Amar b'zeir Toshma, ein li ella milas chorav b'shas asiyah v'avodav b'shas achila. So we really need a psukim over here. So if somebody has an ArtScroll Gemara with the psukim, could someone read the pasuk of there's two psukim that discusses Arelis. One says kol ora lo yoichal boy, or what does it say? There's two lashonis in the psukim. Speaking about oral, if you could read them for me, I'd appreciate it. I'm sorry. It doesn't have anything about oral.
Yeah.
Hima like zachar as yikrav la'asoisa, which means the yid himself has to get a bris, and then he could do the korban pesach. The asiyah of the korban pesach is being makriv the korban. So when the Torah talks about the yid himself needing a bris, the Torah is referring to his ability to make the korban, to shech the korban. Beautiful. What's the other thing where it talks about avodah? There's another pasuk. When it speaks about the chiyuv to mal your avodim, it's not talking about making the korban pesach. It's talking about eating the pesach. So Zok the Gemara Tashma, ein li ela milas acharav b'shas asiyah. I would only know that that in order to be able to make the korban pesach, the makriv the korban pesach, you have to be mal yourself. But the avodah, they only have to be mal b'shas achila. How do you know the opposite? How do you know that the Eved also has to be nimal earlier b'shas asiyah? And how do you know that the Yisrael has to be nimal even later b'shas achila? So you're going to ask me if he's nimal b'shas asiyah, for sure he's nimal b'shas achila. It happens later. So the Gemara is not going to spend a lot of time figuring out a case. But the Gemara Talmud Loimer, oz l'gzeres shav. It says oz yoichlu b'lachmoi, and the other pasuk it's Shmuel where it says oz. What's your pasuk again? Right. So it says oz yikra b'lasosei oz yoichlu b'lachmoi. The Gemara is being the Wizard of Oz, because we're saying it says oz here, it says oz there to tell us that each one applies to the other one. So the Eved has to be nimel b'shas asiyah and b'shas achila, and the person, the Yisrael, has to be nimel b'shas asiyah and b'shas achila as well. So I can find a case where an Eved has a chiyuv to do the bris earlier than the achila, even by the asiyah. Mishkachas law, the isnu b'shas achila, the lashnu b'shas asiyah. So how do you have a case only of one without the other? If you bought an Eved in the afternoon on their Pesach, you had already been makrib your korban Pesach, so you didn't have to mal an Eved because you didn't own the Eved at the time. After you makrib the korban Pesach, you ran out and you bought an Eved. So now you need to do the meal on the Eved just so that he should be able to eat. So therefore, mishkachas law the isnu b'shas achilo v'leshnu b'shas asiyah. You didn't own the avodah b'shas asiyah. Kigoyin desavninu beni beni. El zechara the isnu b'shas achila v'leshnu b'shas asiyah hech mishkachas law. How could you have a person who didn't have a chiyuv to mala b'shas asiyah, and he's only going to have a chiyuv to mala b'shas? I'm sorry, he didn't have a chiyuv to mala b'shas asiyah, but he's only going to have a chiyuv to mala b'shas asiyah achila. How did he bring the carbon if he wasn't gemala? Zok Gemara, what's the only option? Lav, your only option is the isyalid ben asiyah la'achila. He must have a little child that was born Erev Pesach in the afternoon. But that tells you that you have to mala him. He can't eat from the korban Pesach because he's not gemalit. But he doesn't have a chiv mila yet. So shmamina arelos shaloi bezman have arelos. So you see, even though there's not yet a chiyuv to do the mila, he's not 8 days old, but the Torah says you have to have the achila has to be the shas when he's not a normal.
He's not practical. He's not eating anyway. Well, now there's no formula.
Zok the Gemara Amarava betizbra. Betizbra, that doesn't make any sense because it says himoy loy kol zachar Amar Achmana vaz yikav lasoisai, exactly like Mati asked. The high lav bar mehilu. How could you say that when the Torah says himoy loy kol zachar, it's referring to a newborn baby who was just born an hour ago? There is no chiv mila. Even if you wanted to make the mila, it wouldn't work. You can't be mal such a kid. So then we need to find another way to have a case where the Yisrael himself is not mo b'shasta asiyah, yet he'll still have a chiyuv to be mo b'shasta achila. How is that possible? And we're going to have multiple suggestions as to how this is going to work.
That's exactly what the world is trying to prove. That kasha is exactly what the world is trying to prove.
That's right.
So what's the kasha? The point is that there is a
Rabbi's
possibility.
kasha is that can't be pshat. It can't be pshat that a newborn baby is going to be ma'akim some feeding tumor, because you can't put somebody into an impossible position where you can't malach.
Oh, this would be ma'akim the father for me?
Yeah.
Like an ever.
Yeah. So Zok Gemara, so I'll tell you what the story is. This child was very sick. The child was very sick, and you weren't able to do a bris on him. So you're not talking about a child who was just born Pesach Erev Pesach in the afternoon. This child was born a week ago, and today on Erev Pesach is day 8. But the problem is, with Shas Tasiyah, you were not able to do a bris on this child because the child had high fever. And then after you brought the carbon Pesach, the child got better. And if the child got better, now there's a chiyuv to malachim. Simple case. Correct, but that doesn't work because the rule is v'neisav l'kol shiva. Whenever a child is very sick and he can't get a bris, the halacha is you do not do a bris on him as soon as he gets better. After he gets better, you have to wait another 8 days until he's better. So I bezoi, if you're going to say the kid got better on their Pesach, there's no chiyuv to malachim. Zok to Gemara. Oh, Dr. Gemara, Yavin lekol shiva. So let's say that he got better on the 7th day of Nisan, and today is that 8th day, and the 8th day works out. He got better in the afternoon on the 7th day. So now in the afternoon of the 14th day, which is already after the carbon is brought, his chiyuv milah is triggered. Zok Gemara, but in the middle of mitzvah, it's already the 8th day. So why do you have to wait till the afternoon? Then you should have a chiyuv to malam before you made asiyah. So we're right back where we started from. In such a case, the chiyuv would have been in the morning. Zok Gemara, maybe the Gemara holds, but inon me'eis leis. When the baby heals, you give him 8 days. It's 8 days me'eis leis. So if he only got better in the afternoon, then you wouldn't be able to give him his bris till the afternoon of the 14th. So now you have a perfect example of a case where at the b'shas asiyah, the orla wasn't a problem, but b'shas achila, the orla will be a problem. Correct the word, it doesn't work either. Because Vatani Luda, the people from Luda said, Yom Havra also Yom Halada. We treat the day he got better just like the day he was born. My love, what does that mean? Ma Yom Haladai Loiba in a Meis Leis. You don't need Meis Leis. The child can be born right before Shkia on day 1, day 8, you give him a bris first thing in the morning. Af Yom Havra also Loiba in a Meis Leis. So too the day he got better is day number 1. Day number 8, you can give him the bris first thing in the morning. So once again, we don't have a way to find a child who would only be mechuyev in the bris milah in the afternoon. We're trying to find, the Torah tells us that the child has to be moho, someone has to be moho b'shas achila. The Gemaras want to know, if we already know you have to be moho b'shas asiyah, why don't you need a person to tell me you got to be moho b'shas achila? How could you ever have a case where it wouldn't be a problem?
People from like that, they can figure this out.
I think we're being arrived from the Anshe Ludah that this is pshat, right? Vatani, they quoted a bright. Oh, was it a prison? Oh, well, never mind. Rashi is Shem Chacham. Right? The Ludah quoted a Mishnah, right? Yeah. Zok to Gemara, lo adif yom haver asay miyom elada. The ilu yom elada loy ba inim eisleis. The ilu, let's say they're not the same. Rather, maybe it means adif yom haver asay miyom elada. Maybe the yom haver asay, the day he got better, is more strict than the day of he gave birth, the day he was born. The yom elada loy ba inim eisleis. When we count from his day of birth, you don't need 24 hours of meisleis. Rather, at the beginning of the 8th day, you do the bris like we do. So this is solution number 1 to our problem. You have a child who got better late in the afternoon, and therefore his chiyuv to have a bris would only be triggered late in the afternoon. So b'shas asiyah, there was no issue with the child being an oral, but b'shas achila, we need to make sure the child has a bris. Imagine, besides all the other preparations this fellow has to do to prepare for Pesach, and a half hour before Shkia, he needs to make a bris too. What does he serve? He can't serve chametz, he can't serve matzah. So I don't know what he serves. Maybe he gets out cheap. He doesn't have to serve anything. Okay. Zok, what? The pregel, yeah. Rav Papa says, Kagoyin, the choyv la'eneli yinuk, the isbach, beini beini. We're not speaking about fever, which requires an 8-day grace period. We're speaking about his eyes were hurting, which is not such a severe type of illness. It's enough that he doesn't have to get a bris. We don't give him a bris, but it's not enough to require an 8-day wait period. So therefore, if the child got better from this condition right after the shas asiyah, that would be relevant. He needs to get a bris before the achila. So that's the second solution we have. The third solution is Rav Amar going to you over the imay chavushim beveis asurik. The reason why the parents weren't mechuyev is because they were in jail and they couldn't possibly make a bris on their child. They could still, if they're not able, they're nensim, they cannot do a bris on their child. They could still hire somebody to bring the carbon Pesach on their behalf. But if they become freed before Pesach, then of course they have to do a bris. That's the third solution. It's speaking that the child was a tumtum until late in the afternoon before Pesach. A tumtum is not mechuyev in a bris, but somehow his things got opened up, and therefore a chiyuv to make a bris was triggered. Shravi says, no, tumtum is like a scratch and win ticket. Until you scratch it, it might be a boy. Once you scratch it, boom. If it's not a boy, it's not a boy. So he scratched and won. He was a boy, you know. Rab Shravi says, the child stuck his head out. And it's a shiloh if it means he stuck his head out of the body of the woman or out of the uterus. And that's called a birth. And so that's called born. There are 7 days have passed. This woman is in a very long labor. The head came out, but the body didn't. He shaitas of Rashi, the child is considered born. Once the head of the child comes out, it's considered born. I'm sorry? Okay. And then after the carbon basic was brought, the guf came out. So now, al tachila, there's going to be a chiyuv to make a bris. And we didn't know before. The Havil Osman Mila. Could a child possibly survive if his head came out already, but not his body? It would be impossible to survive. Listen to what? This is Gavalti. But Tanya, we learned, the moment a child's head comes out and the child is born, his nourishment, his source of nourishment changes. Niftach hasasum, the mouth that was not being used to eat with is now opened, and that is his avenue to eat. The nistam hapasuach, and the umbilical cord stops, and therefore he needs to nurse. If it wasn't for this happening, it would be impossible for a child to survive. So the moment the child sticks his head out, it needs to nurse. Raj says the reason why I can't live 1 minute is it needs to nurse. Now you tell me, how are you going to nurse a kid that's still between your legs? Impossible, right? So this child is going to I formula. It was speaking in Biden's time, where there's no formula, like Shlomi said, right? So Mamel, this child could not possibly survive. So the Gemara, so how can you say that's the case? So the Gemara, no, I'll tell you how it could survive. If the child has fever and the child is sick, it doesn't need food. Don't ask me how that works. But the Gemara is saying when the child is sick, that sickness takes away the appetite for the child to eat. The child will not need to eat.
That's for sure. It definitely takes away the appetite, but the child might die from lack of food.
Vice versa, the child doesn't. I don't know how that works. Without food. I kind of survive 6 to 12 minutes without food.
But it's still attached to the umbilical cord?
Yeah.
Even though you're sick?
Yeah.
So maybe that's right.
No, because we already said that was soisim, that was pasuach. In fact, the more isha demand, who got sick? Ilam isha today, if the child herself was sick, well then the hachi called shiva blood. Didn't we say when the child is sick, the child has to wait 7 days? So by there wouldn't be a chiyuv. Ella the zon say ishta the ime. The mother was sick, and since the mother was sick, that also makes it that the child doesn't have to eat. So therefore, that's the case. And the child came out completely late in the afternoon. We see it's a boy. We need to do this. So I think that's shot number 5. When do you say that a child that a child will not survive. That's if it doesn't scream. But if it screams, if it screams, then it will eat. I'm not sure why screaming gives the child koyach to eat. I'm not sure. But if the child comes out and screaming,
Like fever. It gets hot again.
so child screaming. Oh, I'm sorry. You're actually yes, I forgot that. That also gets him to kach, and that will also quell his appetite. I want to try that. If I scream a whole day, maybe it's a good diet method. Zog the Gemara weiter. So we have like 6 ways where the chiyuv to do a bris will only occur after the korban pesach was already brought, but before the korban pesach was eaten. Amar Rabbi Yochanan mishum Rabbi Bano. Oral makabel hazah. If an oral is coming, okay, so let's say it was before the korban pesach, and the person was an oral, right? And he needed to get spritzed b'reviyu b'shvi, b'shlishiyu b'shvi, in order to be able to be tar, but he happened to not have had his bris yet. So would the zrika work to be matar him from his tumas mace, even though he's only going to get his bris later? So Rabbi Noah said, if you said Vada, it works. And I can prove it to you, because when the Eden came into Eretz Yisrael for Yeshua, that's exactly what occurred. Shekein matzina b'ava yisenu, shekiblu azah kishein arelim. The ones that were tamei got spritzed. They were all tamei. The ones that were tamei got spritzed from the par aduma before they had their bris. How do I know that? We know that when did they get into Eretz Yisrael? On the 10th day of Nisan, right before Pesach. The 10th of Nisan. The very day that they arrived, we wouldn't have given them a bris. Because after traveling, they're very weak and it wouldn't be safe to give them a bris. So that means they got the bris on day 11. Day 14, which is only 3 days later, they have to bring the korban pesach. They were all tamei mace from the midbar. They have to all bury their fathers, Rashi told us. So if they were all tamei mace, how is it possible that they had 2 zrikas on day 3 and day 7 if they only had 3 days from the day of their bris till the day of the korban pesach? Hazah amos avadlu. It must be that they did hazah before they had their bris. Lav kashein aregel. So tomorrow, what's the raya? Who said they made a korban pesach? V'dim alevet pesach klal. Maybe they couldn't. Maybe they were Thomas. They didn't make korban pesach. Zok Gemara loy sol kedai. It's not mustaber to say that they did not make the korban pesach. It says they made the korban pesach. So therefore, the only way they could have possibly been matar themselves would have been before they had their bris. Mazgavul marzutra. B'dilma pesach haba b'tumahaya. If everybody in Klal Yisrael is tamei, well, then you could bring it anyway. So who said, in fact, that they were matar? Amar Rabashi, Tana behedyo. We learned the brisa, the fairs. It says malu v'tavlu v'asu b'schein b'tahara. So the Tana tells us that they actually were matar. So you'll have a raya that the zrika of the paraduma works even on the nara. Amar Rabba bar Yitzchak Amar Rav. Lo nitne priya smila l'Avram Avinu. We do mila and then we do priya. Priya is after they cut the foreskin, they tear. There's 2 halves, right? That you basically cut a strip out, right? It's a strip all the way around, it gets cut, right? Do you know how that works? They literally cut a strip out from around the circumference. So the way they do it is it's very loose, the skin. They pull it over the whole top and they cut it. When it snaps back, the top skin is now separated from the bottom skin. In order that it shouldn't grow back, they take the bottom skin and they tear it. When they tear it, somehow that stops it from growing. So they make a vertical cut. It's torn to make sure that it doesn't grow back.
It's like there was a oil, and one time I won this, he held up his hand and he showed everybody, see, I have no nails. I want you to know that the tree was unbelievable. You know, I'm not like this.
Really? Wow. Well, nowadays there's a method where they snip a lot and they don't do priya either. There's such a method, I think. I'm not a moil, I don't know, and I never even got close. Because I can't. So, but truth, I shouldn't speak. I don't know. We don't have a moil here. I'm a pisk. I'm not a moil. So let's see what it says over here in the Gemara. So, but this mitzvah of priya was not done by Avraham Avinu. In those days, it wasn't done. How do we know? Shinemar says, "Ba'osahi Amar Hashem al Yeshua asay lecha charves turim." Make yourself stones to make a meal knife. So prepare for yourself a Milanite. So why is he making a Milanite? Why is he making a Milanite if they were mole already? Zok to Gemara, the Dilma Hanach to mole. Maybe the only people who Hashem was Mitzvah Yeshua to give a bris to were those who didn't have a bris at all. How do you know that he's doing another procedure on those people who already had a bris? Because the whole right is the fact that Hashem said, prepare yourself a night for the bris. People had a bris already. Elamai, they had to do priya. He had to do the second part of the bris. Right. How do you know? Maybe there are some people who didn't have a bris at all. But Gemara, because it says in the pasuk, oh no, so you have a right from here that the Chalama Yeludim didn't get a bris. So maybe since the pasuk the Pharaoh says some people had a bris and some people didn't, maybe the Charvei Surim was to give a bris to those who did not have a bris yet. So Gemara, no, because in Cain, my shuv, the pasuk says, I don't have the pasuk in front of me. If you read the pasuk, it says shuv malvim again. Can you read the pasuk for us? The shuv malvim again. So right. So it says malvim in, that could mean a second shift. But the shuv malvim again shows you that a person who's gone mal already, you got to do a bris again. Could you imagine Martin? Someone tells you, Martin, you gotta fix you, right? So they had to do a bris again. Ella lavla priya. It must be that priya wasn't done because that chiyuv came now when the Rebbe told Yeshua, "Asay lacham chayv b'shua." Umay shenis. Zok Gemara lakusha soif mila l'tchilas mila. Ma t'chilas mila ma'akeves. This same way, the original part of the bris is ma'akev. If you didn't do that, you're not a mole. Af soif mila ma'akvin. The priya is a chiyuv you have to do. Ma'akvin boy. Ditnan eluhein sitzina ma'akvin esamila. What are the little pieces of skin that are ma'akvin the mila? Basar achoifa is roiv hatar. If there's any foreskin that covers roiv of that Torah, they ain't oichel b'truma, and they can't eat truma if that wasn't all taken away. Amar Avinu v'tem Rabbi Yirmiyah be'Abba Amarav, basar achoifa is roiv goy v'sholatar. It's not only basar that goes around the whole. It's not basar that goes around the whole circumference. Even if it doesn't go around the whole circumference, there's only one place where the skin extends most of the Torah up. That little strip would be enough to say that the bris isn't complete and the person wouldn't be able to eat truma nor from the carbon base. We just said now that in the midbar people didn't get the bris. So why didn't they get the bris in the midbar? Either it's because it's too dangerous to give someone a bris when they're weakened because of the traveling. Because they didn't have the northern wind blowing, which would it's not too hot, it's not too cold. It's a perfect type of wind, and that helps things heal.
There's no worry about
In Mitzrayim, I guess that would be okay. I think the Shiloh was on a couple of days before that. We had a sugya about that. How did they go right away after? I think we actually discussed that once. The Tanya Kalashna brought him Shana Shoy Yisrael Midbar, but not for them Ruch Tzefaynis. Why not? Why Taka didn't they have this new Ruch Tzefaynis? My timer. So to Ibai said Mishum in the Zuf and Havu, they were stickle in trouble. Why? It's because they had the Maisa Egel, and they weren't royu to this or Noiga. Or Ibai Sema, the Nivder Ananaya covered. If the wind would blow too much, it would disperse Ananaya covered. Their shelter were clouds. The enemy of clouds are wind. So that's what he didn't do. Amar Papa, therefore, Papa Hilchach, Yoyim de Eva, on the cloudy day, Yoyim de Shusa, and on a day where there's no sun, Yoyim de Shusa means, Sharuach Duroimis min Hasheves, Nikashim Mikol Ruchos, if it's a cloudy day and it's a very windy day, Loy Ma'alinin Bey, you will not give a bris on those days. V'loy Misuchrinon Bey, and you don't do Misuchrinon. I'm not even sure what Misuchrinon means because I didn't prepare this. What? Oh, you don't do bloodletting? Okay. Why? But nowadays we're not concerned. Hashem saves us from ourselves. Okay, we'll stop here. Tomorrow. Again, it's a beautiful Gemara.